Before the video begins, I want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, which comes from my guy Derrick. Derrick is creating real life rosters for the 2020-2021 college basketball season on NBA 2K for Xbox One. If you're interested in supporting the making of these rosters, make sure you check him out on Paetron, which the link will be provided down in the comment section in the description down below. He has several membership options to choose from if you want to help support the making of these rosters. The bronze membership is $10 a month and gives you access to the full NCAA 2020-2021 roster with a base of 30 teams, as well as the full NCAA 2019-2020 roster with over 90 plus teams. The silver membership is $15 a month, and with this membership, you get the 2020-2021 NCAA college basketball rosters with an additional 6 teams, 36 teams in total, and also you get an exclusive roster update which adds more teams every month. There are also more memberships available on the page. So we got to talk about the Steelers offense. How good would the Pittsburgh Steelers be in 2020 on the offensive side of the football? So in 2019, we already know, if you watch the Steelers, that the offense was absolutely terrible. And for years, I kept on telling people that Ben Roethlisberger was the driving force behind the Steelers offense. And nobody wanted to believe me. Everybody kept on saying for years that Ben Roethlisberger gets carried by Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell. He's carried by talent. And for years, I've been telling people that Ben Roethlisberger, without Big Ben, the Steelers offense wouldn't be anything. So what happens? Ben Roethlisberger gets injured, and the Steelers go from having one of the best offenses in the NFL to one of the worst offenses in the NFL. Now, given Randy Fichtner deserves a good amount of blame because I feel that his play calling could have been a lot better. And also, I'm not going to completely blame Randy Fichtner for the offensive entire struggle, simply for the fact that Ben Roethlisberger wasn't playing. So, therefore, Randy Fichtner deserves 60% of the blame for the Steelers' offensive struggles. Now, when you look at the Steelers' offense, I mean, you had Mason Rudolph and Doug Hodges playing quarterbacks, and both of those quarterbacks had different skill sets, different things that they were good at. For Mason Rudolph, he had a great arm, but he was inaccurate. He was really erratic when it came to accuracy. And for Doug Hodges, he was accurate, but he couldn't throw the football that far. And that showed when we got inside the red zone, because a lot of Doug Hodges' interceptions came inside the red zone because he simply didn't have the arm strength to fit the ball in the tight windows. So with Ben Roethlisberger coming back, I think the Steelers' offense is going to be really good. A lot of people aren't talking about this, but I think the Steelers have one of the most underrated young wide receiving corps in all of the entire NFL. Look at Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson had a phenomenal rookie season. He had like 600 yards and 6 touchdowns. And imagine how good Deontay Johnson is going to be with Ben Roethlisberger coming back at the helm at the quarterback position. Then you have James Washington. Now, we know James Washington and Ben Roethlisberger kind of had sort of a rocky past. Ben Roethlisberger a couple of times before this season has called James Washington out publicly, saying that he needs to step up, he needs to be a little bit more better. And a lot of people kind of criticize Ben Roethlisberger for that because, you know, James Washington is a young rookie wide receiver. You got to give the time. You got to give the kids some time to grow. You got to give them some time to develop. Well, we saw James Washington last year. He came up really close for the Pittsburgh Steelers last year. I mean, he was probably the best deep threat that the Steelers had in their offense last year. I mean, he caught a lot of big touchdowns and big moments of some games. So, I mean, James Washington really came through, and we really saw just a little bit of how good James Washington can be. We just saw a little bit of his potential. And with Ben Roethlisberger coming back fully healthy in 2020, we should see Deontay Johnson and James Washington go off in 2020. Now, we got to talk about some other wide receivers who a lot of people aren't talking about. We got to talk about Deon Cain. Now, I know Deon Cain doesn't really have a lot of impressive stats. The Steelers picked him up like late in the season when he got released by the Indianapolis Colts. But, I mean, I felt like if Deon Cain got a little bit more reps, he got a little bit more time to shine, I actually think that he can end up being a really good, solid wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I thought that Deon Cain and a few games that he played for the Pittsburgh Steelers was really solid, especially considering the quarterback position. So, I mean, the Steelers' offense is going to be really good in 2020. A lot of people keep saying that our offense is going to be trash, and I don't know why people keep saying that, because we had like a 4th-string quarterback playing quarterback. Doug Hodges was on the Steelers practice squad before the season began. Then Roethlisberger went down. Mason Rudolph had a couple of good games, and everybody had confidence in Mason Rudolph. So they trade away Joshua Dobbs. They promote Doug Hodges up to the main roster. Then they don't like then Mason Rudolph gets knocked out by Earl Thomas. Then Doug Hodges comes in, and then he plays really well. Then Doug Hodges struggles. They insert Mason Rudolph back into the starting lineup. And then he gets knocked out by Myles Garrett, and then after that, he just wasn't the same. And then Doug Hodges just came in and remained the starter for the rest of the season. So a lot of people aren't talking about how the quarterback position held back the offense. Excuse me for the word I phrased that, but I mean, the Steelers offense got held back by the quarterback position. Not to mention, Juju Smith-Schuster and James Conner both missed a good stretch of the season due to injury. So the Steelers offense was also without two of their best playmakers. So we got to talk about Juju Smith-Schuster. So Juju Smith-Schuster didn't really live up to the expectations that a lot of people had from him since Antonio Brown left, and a lot of people were under the expectation that Juju Smith-Schuster could end up filling that role and being a true number one wide receiver. And to be fair, I think the criticism of Juju Smith-Schuster is a little bit unfair because, listen, this was a guy who still had a pretty productive season despite Ben Roethlisberger being injured and despite playing with two different quarterbacks. So, I mean, I want to see how good Juju Smith-Schuster can be with Ben Roethlisberger as the quarterback for most of the entire season, basically. So before you judge Juju Smith-Schuster and say that he's not a true number one wide receiver, let's see what Juju can do when Ben comes back fully healthy and plays for a full entire season. Then if Juju Smith-Schuster once again doesn't live up to the expectations, then yeah, you can say Juju Smith-Schuster isn't a true wide receiver. But I think that Juju Smith-Schuster is better off in the slot. But I also think Juju is really good as an outside wide receiver. And the reason why I think Juju is probably going to have a bounce back season this season is because the emergence of James Washington and Deontay Johnson, especially Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson can play outside. He can also play slot as well because he's a good route runner. He also has a very good release. So, I mean, Deontay Johnson is going to be a big reason why Juju Smith-Schuster can have a bounce-back year because, you see, last year, defenses were really just keying in on Juju Smith-Schuster. He was getting doubled besides that Patriots game when basically Stephon Gilmore just took him out the game and Juju Smith-Schuster was pretty much irrelevant. So, I mean, other than that Patriots game, I mean, Juju Smith-Schuster was getting a double team. So, it wasn't really a lot of reliable options for Ben Roethlisberger to throw the football to other than Vance McDonald. And you got to think about it. The Steelers wide receiving core going into last season was unproven. There was a lot of question marks about the Steelers wide receiving core. Well, now we see how good these wide receivers are. James Washington now going into his third year is probably going to end up breaking out. Deontay Johnson, we already saw a little bit of how good he was. Now imagine how good he's going to be with Big Ben coming back. Then we also got to talk about the addition of Eric Ebron. You see, now with the addition of Eric Ebron, the Steelers offense is going to be a lot better with Eric Ebron because the Steelers offense has always revolved around having a very good and athletic tight end. The Steelers haven't had that ever since Heath Miller retired. I mean, they tried to replace that with Ladarius Green. I mean, Ladarius Green was a beast, but the only thing with Ladarius Green was that the dude couldn't stay healthy. The dude only played in like 3 games, but in those 3 games, he was an absolute monster. So, I mean, the thing with the Steelers offense is all about the development of the young wide receivers. Now, with the development that we saw last year with every single wide receiver coming into 2020, I expect every wide receiver coming into 2020 that's projected to be a starter, such as Deontay Johnson, James Washington, and Juju Smith-Schuster, to really take off next season. And I think Pittsburgh could have 2 Pro Bowl caliber wide receivers. I think it could either be Juju or Deontay Johnson or Juju or James Washington. I think the Steelers wide receiving core is that good. And with Eric Ebron at the helm, the Steelers always wanted an athletic tight end. And basically, Eric Ebron is basically that tight end that Steelers have been searching for over the last couple of seasons. Now, when it comes to the offensive line is just a little bit of a question mark because of the fact that Ramon Foster ended up retiring. Now, Ramon Foster wasn't one of the best at his position or anything like that, but he was a solid starter. He was always a guy who was pretty consistent, didn't really get injured that much. So, I mean, he was a really solid part of that offensive line for Pittsburgh, so the Steelers have to figure out a way to replace him. But Steelers mostly have a very good offensive line. Over the last couple of seasons, the Steelers have had a top 5 offensive line. Now, another big question is the halfback position. Now, James Washington Washington, without a doubt, is the RB1 in Pittsburgh. But the thing is that he can never stay healthy. Now, Jalen Samuels has also had a couple of games when he has some very nice games and things like that. But he's more of a good halfback when you want to line him out wide and get him involved in the passing game. Now, I do want to see a little bit more. I want to, not even just a little bit, I want to see a lot more of Benny Snell, because I think Benny Snell has a lot of potential. And I mean, a few appearances that we saw of Benny Snell was a freaking workhorse. Now, if Pittsburgh drafts another halfback in the NFL draft, which a lot of people believe that they will, and I believe that they will, this halfback position is going to get a little bit more crowded. It's all because James Washington can't stay healthy. But if James Conner stays healthy, this Steelers offense is not only going to be good passing the football, but also good running the football as well. Because a lot of people forget, when James Washington was healthy, I mean, this was a dude who was the MVP of the Steelers offense when he was healthy. Go back and look at some of the games that he played in, man. I mean, dude was a stud. And let's not forget, James Washington isn't that far removed from being a Pro Bowler. When a lot of people were talking about who's going to end up replacing Le'Veon Bell, James Conner came in and removed all the doubt and ended up making a Pro Bowl the year that Le'Veon Bell ended up leaving the Steelers. And not even, well, he didn't leave the Steelers at this point, but he sat out the whole entire season. So, I mean, a lot of people are really sleep on James Conner. James Conner is a really good back when he's able to stay healthy. But the thing is, he can't stay healthy, so Steelers got to bring in some more halfbacks. But, I mean, the halfback position for Pittsburgh is really good, man. So, back to the main question is, how good would this Steelers offense be in 2020? This offense is going to be a lot better than what it was last season. And I think the Steelers offense, it might not be top 10. I think top 10 might be a little bit of a stretch. But I do think this offense has the potential to be the 12th or 13th best offense in the NFL in 2020.